Hey, what's up guys? This is the video for section 6.2, solving systems using the substitution method. On the previous video for section 6.1, I showed you guys how to solve a system by graphing. Well, today we don't have to graph. We are not using the slope and the y-intercept. You guys will do this by substitution. So let's just review what is substitution, the vocabulary. Substitution, the word substitution means you are going to replace one number or one variable with a number, or in this case today you guys will see that you will replace a variable with an equation. Now don't get confused when you substitute, but the idea is you replace something with something else. I have 4 steps that you guys can follow to solve a system by substitution. The 4th step is kind of like optional, but it helps to find out if you got the right answer. Let's go ahead and look at step number 1. Step number 1, when you solve by substitution, you must isolate the variable that has a coefficient of 1 or a negative 1. Remember that a system has 2 variables. It might have an x, it might have a y, it can be different variables. It can have an a or a b, it can have an m or a p. But you just want to find the variable that has a coefficient of 1. What is the coefficient? That's the number in front of the variable, or it might be a negative 1. Now, step number 2, you want to substitute the expression of the variable into the other equation. So the idea is, step number 1, you will get one variable by itself. So I'll give you guys an example, all right? You might have an equation where x equals, and I'm just going to put it on the side of the one here, x equals 2y minus 3. Notice this variable has a coefficient of 1 and it's by itself, and x equals all of this right here. So step number 2, when it says substitute the expression of the variable into the other equation, that means that you guys will take this and substitute into the second equation. And in the example I'll show you guys how to do that. After you substitute, you solve for the common variable. So you're going to solve for the variable that's present when you substitute. Number 3, substitute the value of the new variable into one of the equations and solve for the next common variable. So step number 2, you guys will have a value. So let's say, for example, that you guys get, for step number 2, y equals negative 7. This is just an example. You guys will take this number here. You are going to substitute into one of the equations, and it doesn't matter which one at this point, and you're going to solve for the next variable. Now, again, guys, your answer must be in parentheses because it is an ordered pair. So I'm just going to give you guys some numbers here. Let's say that the answer is 3 and negative 7. So my answer must be an ordered pair. We are going to look for the x. We are going to look for the y. Now, step number 4, you can check your solutions, or your solution is only one, or you might have many solutions, you might have no solutions. But if you guys have a solution, x and y, you can substitute into the system both equations and check that it's a true statement for both of them, right? So just keep in mind, step number 4 is optional. So once in a while, you guys can check, or if you guys have the free app, Desmos, you guys can graph it, and that's going to check for you guys. So let's try an example here. I'm going to follow the 3 steps. And step number 1, example number 1, you want to solve using the substitution method. So I'm looking at the system. I want to compare the 2 equations that are in the system. The first one is y equals x plus 1. The second one is y equals 2x minus 1. I want to find the value of x, the value of y, that is going to work for both equations when I substitute those numbers. So whatever numbers I substitute here for x and y, I have to substitute here for x and y, and they must be a true statement. Now, for substitution method, step number 1, you guys want to get one of the variables that has a coefficient of 1 by itself. So I'm looking at the variables right here. I notice the y has a coefficient of 1. This x has a coefficient of 1, this y has a coefficient of 1, this x has a coefficient of 2. So the number in front of the variable is your coefficient. You always want a variable by itself. So guess what, guys? This y is by itself and it has a coefficient of 1. So step number 1, I can use this equation. But if you notice the bottom also has a coefficient of 1 for the y and it's by itself. So for step number 1, you are going to use one equation and you can choose the top since it has a y by itself or the bottom since it has a y by itself. I'm going to choose the top. Doesn't matter which one you choose, but I'm just going to choose y equals x plus 1. So guess what? Once again, y is by itself. So this is already ready to substitute into the other equation. So I can go to step number 2. Step number 2, you guys are going to substitute all of this value, this expression right here, y equals x plus 1. So this right here is what y equals. And you are going to use the second equation. My second equation is this one. I already used the top, so now I'm using the bottom. So I have y equals 2x minus 1. So I'm going to substitute this expression into the y right there. That's what we do. So I have x plus 1 equals 2x minus 1. So notice what happened. The y became x plus 1. On the right side, I just rewrote 2x minus 1. So now we're ready to solve this equation. There's an x on the left, there's an x on the y on the right, so we can get x by itself. So I'm just going to get the x's on one side. I'm going to do the opposite of the smallest x, so minus x here. And I'm going to solve. This is gone. Positive 1 equals 1x minus 1. Now I do the opposite of the constants. I add 1 to both sides. And this is gone. So we have 2 equals x. Or we can say x equals 2. Hey, guess what, guys? We have one variable. So my solution is going to be, so let me put here, for my x, we know it's 2. But now we have to find the y value. Okay? So this is where step number 3 comes in. Step number 3, now that we have one value, x equals 2, you guys are going to substitute that value into one equation in the system. Doesn't matter which one. You choose one equation and you substitute x and you solve for y. Now, just to give you a heads up, for this step number 2, you might get y equals a number. Doesn't matter. It's okay. You can solve for x first or you can solve for y first in the second step. As long as you have one of the variables, you substitute into the system and you find the second one. So for step number 3, I like this one, y equals x plus 1. So I'm just going to substitute y equals x plus 1, and I'm going to substitute the 2 into the x. So here's my x right here, guys. So I'm going to put y equals, and I'm going to substitute 2, that's my x, plus 1. And 2 plus 1 is 3. So we got the answer for the y. So now I can complete my solution. My solution is, for my x is 2, and for my y is 3. So we got the answer. 2, 3. Now remember, in my previous video, in the previous section, 6.1, we learned that a system of equations, when they intersect one time, that is your solution, the point of intersection. So if you guys graph this line, y equals x plus 1, the slope is 1, the y-intercept is 1, and you graph this line, y equals 2x minus 1, the slope is 2 over 1, you make it a fraction, and the y-intercept is negative 1, they will intersect at this point, 2, 3. You guys can check. You guys can substitute these two numbers into the system, and then you guys can figure out if it's a true statement. And like I mentioned before, guys, there is a free app you guys can use as well. Desmos, you can graph the two lines in the app and check that they do intersect at 2 and 3. in class, we are going to practice how to check using decimals. So in this video, I'm just going to skip that step, but make sure that you guys, once in a while, you can check. All right, second example, you want to solve by substitution. So notice here, we have different equations. This is a system, y equals 5x plus 1 and 4x plus y equals 10. I want to find out the y values and the x values that are going to work for both equations. You substitute the values and they give you guys a true statement. Now, by substitution, step number 1, I need to find one of the variables that has a coefficient of 1, and you want to get that variable by itself. You want to isolate the variable. So I notice this y has a coefficient of 1, this x has a coefficient of 5, this x has a 4, and this y has a 1. So I'm looking at the y's. This y has a 1, this y has a 1. But guess what? This y is already isolated. It has y by itself. So for step number 1, I can use this equation. You always want to look for the variable that's by itself or and that has a coefficient of 1. So I'm going to use y equals 5x plus 1. Step number 2, you guys are going to use the other equation. So the one we didn't use, the bottom one, 4x plus y equals 10. And I'm going to substitute this expression, y equals 5x plus 1. So that's what y equals. I'm going to substitute into this y right there. So when you substitute, I'm going to have 4x plus, I'm going to use parentheses because I'm going to substitute the expression equals, and I have the 10. So what is y? 5x plus 1. Now, notice that outside of the parentheses, we have an invisible 1, positive. So if you guys distribute the 1, nothing is going to change. So we don't need those parentheses. So I'm just going to have 4x plus 5x plus 1 equals 10. Now you guys solve. You guys combine like terms on the same side of the equation. So here's the equal sign. So we can combine those two. You can add 4x plus 5x is 9x plus 1 equals 10. Now you guys subtract 1 from both sides. This is gone. 9x equals 9. And you divide by 9. So I have x equals, remember this turns into 1. We don't need it. X equals 1. We got the first variable, x. So in my solution, I'm just going to start writing my solution up here. The x value is 1. So my solution, in parentheses, remember x is 1. There's my x. Let me change colors. X here. So now I need my y. So step number 3. For step number 3, you guys are going to substitute this value into one of the equations. Doesn't matter which one. It doesn't matter which one you pick. I like the top because y is already by itself. So I'm going to use that one. Y equals 5x plus 1. And you just write it. You write it down so you know what equation you're using. And then you substitute 1 into the x. So y equals 5 parentheses plus 1. So this one goes inside of the parentheses. So I have a 1. I'm going to multiply. Y equals 5 times 1. That's 5 plus 1 is 6. So my answer for y is 6. So my solution is 1, 6. Now, I do want you guys, every time you write down your answer, use parentheses, order paired, and the x is always first and the y is second. Never leave your answer like this. X equals 1, y equals 6. That's not how you write your answer. Your solution has to be in order pair. Because remember, this point is where the two lines, if you graph them, will intersect. You guys can use decimals, again, to check if you guys got the solution correct. But this is how you solve by substitution. And let's go ahead and do one more example before I actually do the second part. So this one here, same thing, you want to solve. First step, you want to get one of the variables isolated that has a coefficient of 1. So this is step number 1. And I notice my x right here is, it has a invisible 1. So I'm going to take that equation and I'm going to solve for x. I'm going to add 2y to both sides. And I have my x, this cancels here, equals positive 2y minus 8. Step number 2, I'm going to take the other equation, the one that we didn't use. So we have negative 2x plus the y equals 10. And I'm going to substitute all of this right here into the x. And I'm saying you substitute into the x because we have x equals. So this equals x. So you substitute into the x. So when you substitute, we have the negative 2. You guys make parentheses and substitute. Let me just bring down the y and the 10. And I'm going to substitute 2y minus 8. I'm going to distribute. I'm going to multiply here. So we have negative 4y plus 16. You bring down the y and the 10. You guys combine like terms. Negative 4y and the y are on the same side. So we have negative 3y plus 16 equals 10. Now you guys subtract 16. Remember, we are solving for y. So this cancels. Negative 3y equals, this one here is a negative 16. So we get negative 6 on this side. Finally, divide by negative 3. And my answer is going to be, for the y, positive 2. This turns into 1 here, and negative 6 divided by negative 3 is positive 2. So now we have the y, we need to find x. So my third step, you guys will choose one equation. You go back, doesn't matter which one. I like the top, so I'm going to use that one. And I'm going to write it down first. X minus 2y equals negative 8. And I'm going to substitute 2 into the y. That's what we have, y equals 2. So I have x minus 2 times 2 equals negative 8. X minus 4 equals negative 8. You guys add 4 to both sides, and when you add, obviously this cancels. X equals negative 4. So we have the answer. And the way you guys write your answer, remember we need a order pair, so we need parentheses. X is always first, and then the y. So once again, x is first, and then the y in your order pair. Make sure you guys have that order, just like alphabetical order. X is for the y, and that's my answer. That is my solution. So this concludes my first video. Make sure you guys check out my second part. I am going to talk about the other options you might have for your solutions, which are many solutions or no solutions at all. So go ahead and make sure you guys check that out. And also practice, practice, practice. And I'll see you guys later.